"Don't you dare touch my child." Catherine's voice cracked like a whip through the marble foyer, her palms still stinging from the slap she'd just delivered. But 30 minutes later, those same hands would be clasped in desperate prayer as the woman she'd struck fought to save the life she treasured most. We've all witnessed that moment when pride collides with desperation, when the person you've dismissed as beneath you suddenly holds everything you love in their capable hands. This isn't just a story about prejudice. It's about the shattering moment when your worst assumptions meet your deepest need, when the woman you forbade from comforting your son becomes his only hope of survival. This is the story of Catherine Westbrook, a Beverly Hills socialite who learned that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places, and Renee Johnson, the woman whose healing hands would transform not just a choking child's airway, but an entire family's understanding of what really matters. Because sometimes the person you slap today is the one who saves your tomorrow. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video and comment where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's go back to where it all began. 3 weeks earlier, Catherine Westbrook adjusted her emerald silk blouse in the hallway mirror of her 7-bedroom estate on Maple Drive, the kind of address that whispered old money and newer arrogance. Her platinum blonde hair fell in perfect waves past her shoulders, and her blue eyes held the particular coldness that came from never being told no. At 28, she had perfected the art of looking beautiful while radiating disapproval. "Preston, darling, your tie is crooked," she called to her husband as he descended the curved staircase, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the white marble steps. Preston Westbrook, 35, moved with the confidence of a man whose tech company had just hit the Forbes billionaire list. His dark hair was styled precisely, his jawline sharp enough to cut glass, and his gray eyes held the calculating look of someone who measured everything in profit margins. "The nanny agency called," Catherine continued, smoothing her hands down her designer dress, a pale yellow number that cost more than most people's monthly salary. "They're sending over 3 candidates this afternoon. I specifically requested, well, people who understand their place." Preston paused, adjusting his navy blue tie without looking at her. "Just hire whoever's best with Caleb. That's what matters." Their 2-year-old son's laughter drifted from the living room where he played with blocks, his auburn curls catching the afternoon light streaming through the windows. Caleb had inherited his father's gray eyes but his mother's delicate features, creating a cherubic face that could melt hearts when his mother allowed anyone close enough to see it. "Of course, but..." Catherine's voice carried that particular tone wealthy white women used when they wanted to say something racist without saying it directly. "We need someone who understands boundaries. Someone grateful for the opportunity." 2 hours later, the doorbell chimed with the first candidate. Then the second. Both were politely dismissed after 10-minute interviews. Too expensive, too educated, too likely to have opinions about childcare that might conflict with Catherine's rigid control. When the third candidate arrived, Catherine opened the door to find a black woman in her early 30s standing on her pristine doorstep. The woman wore a simple navy blue cardigan over dark jeans, her natural hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her warm brown eyes held intelligence and kindness, and her posture spoke of quiet dignity despite the obvious wear on her clothes. "Mrs. Westbrook? I'm Renee Johnson from the agency." Catherine's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the way ice forms on a pond, slowly, then all at once. "Of course you are. What do you think will happen when Renee steps into this house of hidden prejudices? Have you ever witnessed someone's true character revealed in moments of crisis? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories that challenge us to examine our own hearts. Renee's soft voice carried a slight Tennessee accent, warm like honey. "I appreciate you considering me for the position. I have 5 years of experience with toddlers, and I'm CPR certified through the American Red Cross. I completed my certification just last month." She handed over a folder containing her references, her hands steady despite Catherine's obvious reluctance to invite her inside. The October breeze carried the scent of jasmine from the manicured gardens, a stark contrast to the chill emanating from the woman in the doorway. "Come in, I suppose," Catherine said, her tone suggesting this was already a waste of time. The Westbrook home was a monument to wealth. Crystal chandeliers, white marble everything, and furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum rather than a home where a toddler lived. Renee took it all in without comment, her focus immediately drawn to the sound of Caleb's babbling from the next room. "Your son sounds happy," Renee observed, a genuine smile crossing her face. "He's particular about who he likes," Catherine replied, though this wasn't entirely true. Caleb was actually quite social, but Catherine had a way of making statements that served her narrative rather than reality. They sat in the formal living room on furniture that probably cost more than Renee's annual rent. Catherine's questions were sharp, probing, not about childcare experience or educational philosophy, but about availability, salary expectations, and flexibility regarding household rules. "I need to be clear about expectations," Catherine said, crossing her legs and leaning back against the cream-colored sofa. "This position is primarily housekeeping. Light cooking, cleaning, laundry. Caleb has very specific routines that I handle personally." Renee nodded, though something flickered in her eyes. "Of course. Though I should mention, I have specialized training in childhood development and emergency pediatric care. If you ever need dash." "That won't be necessary," Catherine cut her off. "How much were you expecting for salary?" When Renee named a figure, modest by any standard, certainly reasonable for someone with her qualifications, Catherine's eyebrows rose as if she'd asked for the crown jewels. "That's quite high for basic housework. I was thinking more along the lines of half that amount." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Renee's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but her voice remained steady. "Mrs. Westbrook, with respect, that's below minimum wage for the hours you're describing. But you'd have access to a beautiful home, excellent references if you work out, and really, how difficult can it be? It's not exactly brain surgery. If Catherine only knew." Meanwhile, 15 miles away in a cramped one-bedroom apartment in Inglewood, the contrast couldn't have been starker. The walls were thin enough that you could hear neighbors' conversations, the carpet had seen better decades, and the kitchen consisted of 4 square feet of counter space and appliances that belonged in a museum. But this small space held something the Westbrook mansion lacked: warmth. Photos covered every available surface. Renee with her mother at her nursing school graduation, Renee holding various children she'd cared for over the years, Renee volunteering at the local community center's after-school program. On her kitchen table sat a stack of medical bills and past-due notices. Her mother's cancer treatment had drained every penny of savings, and the hospital bills kept coming even though Dorothy Johnson had passed 6 months ago. Renee worked 2 other part-time jobs, morning shifts at a coffee shop and weekend work at a senior center. But it wasn't enough to keep up with the debt. She stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, practicing what she might say. Her nursing degree from UCLA sat framed on the wall, a reminder of dreams deferred by financial reality. She'd been 3 months from completing her pediatric nurse practitioner program when her mother's diagnosis came. The choice had been simple: stay in school or care for the woman who'd raised her alone after her father left when she was 5. "You raised me to help people, Mama," she whispered to the photo on her dresser. "Even when they don't want to be helped." Her phone buzzed with a text from her cousin Marcus. "Girl, you don't have to take whatever they're offering. You know your worth." But knowing your worth and being able to afford your rent were 2 different things. Back in Beverly Hills, Catherine was wrapping up the interview with the air of someone who'd already made her decision, and not in Renee's favor. "Well, thank you for coming. We'll be in touch." Renee stood, gathering her folder of references that Catherine hadn't bothered to review. "Mrs. Westbrook, may I ask what changed your mind? My qualifications meet everything you described on the phone." Catherine's smile was ice water. "It's just fit. I need someone who understands their role and doesn't overstep. Someone grateful for the opportunity." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had just been lit. Renee's voice remained steady, professional. "I am grateful for opportunities, Mrs. Westbrook. I'm grateful for education, for the chance to use my skills to help families, for the ability to make a difference in a child's life. If you change your mind and decide you want someone who genuinely cares about your son's well-being rather than just someone who'll work for below minimum wage, you have my number." She walked toward the door, her dignity intact despite the dismissal. But as she reached for the handle, a small voice called out from the top of the stairs. "Mama! Lady!" Caleb had escaped from his playroom and was peering through the stair railings, his gray eyes bright with curiosity. Before Catherine could react, he was toddling down the stairs with the fearless determination that only 2-year-olds possess. "Caleb, come here right now," Catherine commanded, moving to intercept him. But Caleb had already reached Renee, looking up at her with a kind of open trust that children offer before the world teaches them to be suspicious. "Hi," he said simply, holding up a toy fire truck. Renee knelt down to his level, her entire demeanor softening. "Hi there, sweetheart. That's a beautiful fire truck. Does it make sounds?" Caleb beamed and pressed a button, filling the foyer with tiny sirens. Renee laughed, a genuine musical sound that seemed to light up the cold space. "Caleb!" Catherine's voice was sharp with panic and something else, fear. "Come away from there. Now." But Caleb was already chattering to Renee about his truck, his words a mixture of toddler babble and clear phrases. Renee listened with the focused attention of someone who understood that what children say matters, even when adults can't follow the logic. "He seems to like you," Catherine said, her tone suggesting this was somehow problematic. "Children are good judges of character," Renee replied, standing slowly. "They haven't learned to judge people by the wrong things yet." Something in her tone made Catherine's cheeks flush pink. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing at all, Mrs. Westbrook. Have a lovely afternoon." But as Renee reached her 10-year-old Honda Civic, Catherine called out from the doorway. "Wait." Renee turned, key in hand. "The position. When could you start?" It wasn't kindness that changed Catherine's mind. It was calculus. 3 other candidates had demanded significantly higher wages, and the agency had made it clear that qualified help was in high demand. Sometimes the best option was the one that left you feeling like you'd won a negotiation, even if you'd lost something more important in the process. Monday morning, Mrs. Westbrook. 7 a.m. sharp. As Renee drove away, she caught sight of Caleb's face pressed against the window, still holding his fire truck. She waved, and he waved back with the enthusiasm that only children possess. She had no way of knowing that in 3 weeks, that little boy's life would depend on everything her mother had taught her about medicine, about courage, and about doing what's right even when the world tells you to stay in your place. 3 weeks into her employment at the Westbrook estate, Renee had settled into a rhythm that felt more like walking through a minefield than working in a home. Every morning at 7 sharp, she entered through the service entrance as Catherine had insisted, her footsteps silent on the marble floors as she began her carefully prescribed duties. The house rules were explicit and degrading. No sitting on the furniture. No eating in the main areas. No touching anything beyond what was necessary for cleaning. And most importantly, minimal interaction with Caleb unless absolutely unavoidable. Catherine monitored these rules with the dedication of a prison warden, appearing at unexpected moments to ensure compliance. She had a particular way of clearing her throat when she disapproved of something, a sound that had begun to make Renee's shoulders tense automatically. This particular Tuesday morning carried the crisp promise of December in Los Angeles. The Santa Ana winds had cleared the air, and sunlight streamed through the expansive windows of the Westbrook home, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spirits in the golden beams. Renee was in the living room, carefully dusting the collection of crystal figurines that lined the mantelpiece. Each piece probably cost more than her monthly rent, and she handled them with the practiced care of someone who understood that a single accident could mean financial ruin. Her movements were precise, methodical, almost meditative. The sound of small feet pattering down the hallway broke her concentration. Caleb appeared in the doorway, his auburn curls still messy from his morning nap, wearing striped pajamas and clutching a stuffed elephant that had seen better days. "Nanny," he called out, his toddler pronunciation of her name always bringing a smile to her face despite the circumstances. "Good morning, little man," Renee said softly, glancing toward the kitchen where Catherine was presumably having her morning coffee and reviewing her social calendar. "Did you sleep well?" Caleb nodded enthusiastically and held up his elephant. "Ellie's sad." Renee set down her dusting cloth and knelt to his level, something that had become instinctive despite Catherine's disapproval. "Ellie's sad? What's wrong with Ellie?" "Ellie's sick. Need medicine." The earnestness in his gray eyes tugged at Renee's heart. She'd worked with enough children to recognize when they were processing something through play, often working through fears or experiences they couldn't articulate directly. Well, we should definitely help Ellie feel better, Renee said, her voice taking on the gentle, conspiratorial tone that children respond to. What kind of medicine does Ellie need? Caleb scrunched up his face in concentration. Kiss medicine. And hugs. Without thinking, Renee smiled and gently kissed the top of the stuffed elephant's head, then wrapped both the toy and Caleb in a soft hug. There. All better. Caleb giggled and hugged her back, his small arms wrapping around her neck with the complete trust that children offer to those who show them genuine kindness. For a moment, the cold formality of the house melted away, replaced by the simple warmth of human connection. Ellie happy now, Caleb announced with satisfaction. I'm glad, Renee whispered. You're a very good elephant doctor. I doctor too. Like Daddy's doctor. Renee's eyebrows rose slightly. She hadn't known that Preston had been seeing a doctor regularly, but before she could ask any gentle questions, the sound of high heels clicking rapidly across marble filled the air like gunshots. Catherine appeared in the doorway, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. She wore a cream-colored cashmere sweater and perfectly pressed white slacks, her blonde hair pulled back in a style that emphasized the sharp angles of her face. Her blue eyes blazed with an anger that seemed disproportionate to the scene before her. What exactly is going on here? Catherine's voice was low, dangerous. Renee immediately stood, creating distance between herself and Caleb while keeping her movements calm to avoid frightening him. Caleb was telling me about his elephant. I was just what? Just ignoring every rule I set for this household. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Caleb, sensing the tension, pressed closer to Renee's legs, his elephant clutched tightly to his chest. Mrs. Westbrook, he was upset about his toy. I was only trying to. You were only trying to overstep your boundaries, Catherine interrupted, her voice rising. I specifically told you that interaction with my son was not part of your job description. Renee felt heat rise in her cheeks but kept her voice steady. He's a child, Mrs. Westbrook. When a child is distressed. Don't. Catherine's voice cracked like a whip. Don't you dare tell me about my own child. You are here to clean, nothing more. Not to play therapist, not to play nanny, and certainly not to play mother to my son. The word mother hung in the air like a slap that hadn't yet landed. Caleb looked between the two women, his young mind trying to process the adult tension he couldn't understand. Mama angry? He asked in a small voice. Catherine's attention snapped to her son, and her expression softened marginally. Mama's not angry at you, baby. Mama just needs to have a grown-up talk with Renee. She looked back at Renee, her eyes cold as winter sky. I need you to understand something very clearly. I don't care about your education, your opinions, or your maternal instincts. I care about you doing the job I'm paying you to do without overstepping into areas that are none of your concern. Renee's jaw tightened, but she nodded. I understand, Mrs. Westbrook. Do you? Because this is the second time I've found you engaging with Caleb beyond what's necessary. The first time, I let it slide because he approached you. This time, you initiated contact. He was upset about his toy being sick. I was trying to help. Stop. Catherine held up a perfectly manicured hand. Just stop talking. You don't get to decide what my child needs. You don't get to decide when he's upset or how to comfort him. That's my job. The irony wasn't lost on Renee that Catherine rarely seemed to perform this job she was so protective of. In 3 weeks, she'd observed that Catherine's interactions with Caleb were largely limited to basic care and photo opportunities for her social media accounts. The actual nurturing, the patient answering of endless toddler questions, the reading of bedtime stories, those responsibilities fell to whoever happened to be around. But Renee held her tongue, understanding that pointing out these observations would only make things worse. From now on, Catherine continued, if Caleb approaches you, you direct him to find me. If he seems upset, you find me. If he falls down, you find me. You do not touch him, you do not comfort him, and you certainly do not hug him. Are we clear? Each word felt like a small violence, not just against Renee but against the basic human instinct to care for a distressed child. Yes, ma'am. Good. And since this seems to be a recurring problem, I'll be deducting $50 from your next paycheck. Maybe that will help you remember the boundaries." The financial blow hit Renee like a physical slap. $50 meant choosing between groceries and gas, between medication and electricity. But more than the money, it was the casual cruelty of it that stung. Catherine wielded her wealth like a weapon, using economic pressure to enforce her will. "That seems—" Renee began, then caught herself. "Yes, ma'am." Caleb had been watching this exchange with the wide-eyed absorption that children bring to adult drama they don't understand. "Nene in trouble?" he asked his mother. Catherine's expression softened as she looked at her son. "Nene just needs to remember the rules, baby. Why don't you go find your blocks? Mama will be right there." Caleb nodded and toddled off, but not before turning back to wave at Renee. The gesture was so innocent, so completely unaware of the tension that had just unfolded, that it nearly broke Renee's heart. When they were alone, Catherine's mask slipped back into place. "I want to be very clear about something else. I see the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching. Like you disapprove of how I parent my son." Renee kept her expression carefully neutral. "That's not my place, Mrs. Westbrook." "No, it's not. But since we're having this conversation, let me explain something to you. Caleb is going to inherit a business empire worth billions of dollars. He will move in circles where weakness is exploited and sentimentality is a liability. I'm not raising him to be soft. I'm raising him to be strong." "Kindness isn't weakness," Renee said quietly, the words escaping before she could stop them. Catherine's eyes flashed. "Excuse me." "Nothing. I'm sorry." "No, you said kindness isn't weakness. Are you implying that I'm unkind to my son?" The question hung between them like a loaded gun. Renee understood that her answer could determine whether she kept this job, and without it, she'd lose her apartment within a month. "I would never presume to judge your parenting, Mrs. Westbrook. But you do judge it. I can see it in your eyes every time you watch us together. You think I'm cold, don't you?" Renee remained silent, understanding that any answer would be wrong. Catherine stepped closer, her voice dropping to just above a whisper. "Let me tell you something about the real world. Money doesn't care about your feelings. Success doesn't care about your emotions. I'm preparing my son for reality, not some fairy tale where everyone gets a participation trophy and hugs solve everything." "Yes, ma'am. And another thing. I know exactly what you are." The words carried an undertone that made Renee's stomach clench. "Ma'am, you're one of those people who thinks because you have a degree and some training, you're better than the job you're doing. You think you should be running this household instead of cleaning it." The accusation was so far from the truth that Renee almost laughed. She'd never once felt superior to honest work, having been raised by a woman who cleaned offices at night to put her through school. "That's not true, Mrs. Westbrook." "Isn't it? Then why do you keep overstepping? Why do you keep inserting yourself into situations that don't concern you?" "Because he's a child," Renee said, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. "Because when a 2-year-old is upset, my first instinct is to help, not to worry about workplace hierarchies." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had just ignited. Catherine's face went white, then red. "How dare you? Mrs. Westbrook, I didn't mean." "Get out." "I'm sorry, Get out of my house. Right now." Renee felt the world tilt sideways. "Mrs. Westbrook, please. I need this job." "You should have thought about that before you decided to lecture me about parenting in my own home." "I wasn't lecturing. I was just—" "You were just showing your true colors," Catherine said, her voice rising to a near shout. "This is exactly what I was talking about. You think because you went to some school, you know better than me how to raise my own child." The confrontation had escalated beyond reason, beyond proportion. What had started as a simple moment of kindness toward a child had become a battle of wills, a clash of worldviews that neither woman was prepared to lose. And that's when Catherine's hand moved faster than thought, faster than reason. The slap echoed through the marble foyer like a gunshot. Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone's true character was revealed in an instant of anger? What do you think drives people to such extremes? Share your thoughts below, and make sure to subscribe because what happens next will challenge everything we think we know about judgment and redemption. The sound of Catherine's palm striking Renee's cheek reverberated through the marble foyer like a church bell announcing Judgment Day. For a moment that stretched into eternity, both women stood frozen in the aftermath of what had just occurred. Renee's hand moved slowly to her face, her fingertips touching the burning spot where Catherine's hand had made contact. The physical pain was sharp but temporary. The humiliation cut deeper, settling into her chest like a weight she'd carry for years. Catherine stared at her own hand as if it belonged to someone else. Her perfectly manicured fingers trembled slightly, and her face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. She'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, entered territory that would change everything between them forever. Catherine started, then stopped. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Renee's voice, when it came, was quieter than a whisper but carried the weight of mountains. "Did you just hit me?" The question hung in the pristine air of the Westbrook home, surrounded by crystal figurines and imported marble that had witnessed something ugly, something that would stain this place forever. Catherine's jaw tightened as she fought to regain her composure. Instead of apologizing, instead of acknowledging the magnitude of what she'd done, she doubled down. You were being insubordinate. You were questioning my authority in my own home. So you hit me. Renee's voice remained steady, but her eyes blazed with something that made Catherine take an involuntary step backward. I defended myself against your disrespect. You assaulted your employee because she showed kindness to your child. The word assault seemed to snap Catherine back to reality. She looked around frantically, as if suddenly aware that witnesses might have seen what happened. The house felt too quiet, too empty, as if the very walls were holding their breath. You're being dramatic, Catherine said, but her voice lacked conviction. It was barely a tap. Renee's cheeks still burned, and she could feel the heat radiating from the spot where Catherine's hand had landed. A tap. You were out of line. I corrected you. You struck me for hugging a distressed child. Catherine's face flushed red again. Don't you dare try to make this about Caleb. This is about you refusing to respect boundaries, refusing to stay in your lane. My lane. Renee's voice carried a dangerous edge now. And what lane is that, Mrs. Westbrook? The question crackled with implications that both women understood, but neither wanted to voice. Catherine's breathing became shallow, her chest rising and falling rapidly as she realized she was standing at the edge of saying something that would reveal the ugliest parts of her soul. Your lane is doing what I pay you to do without questioning my decisions or inserting your opinions where they don't belong. Even when those decisions involve ignoring a child who needs comfort. Especially then. Catherine's voice rose to a near shriek. He's my son. Mine. Not yours. The possessiveness in her voice was fierce, almost feral. But beneath it, Renee heard something else. Fear. Catherine wasn't just angry about boundaries being crossed. She was terrified of being replaced, of someone else being better at caring for her child than she was. I never tried to replace you, Renee said softly. I was just being human. Well, maybe you need to be less human and more professional. The words hung between them like acid rain, corroding everything they touched. From upstairs came the sound of Caleb's voice, singing a nursery rhyme to his elephant. The innocence of it, the pure joy in his small voice, made the ugliness of what had just transpired feel even more toxic. I should call the police, Renee said quietly. Catherine's face went white. You wouldn't dare. Wouldn't I? You just committed assault and battery. There are laws about this, Mrs. Westbrook. Laws that apply to everyone, even people with marble floors and crystal collections. It's your word against mine, Catherine said, but her voice shook. Is it? Because I'm wondering if your husband would be interested to know that his wife strikes the help when she gets angry. I'm wondering if your social circle would be fascinated by that little detail. Catherine's eyes widened with panic. Her carefully constructed image, her position in Beverly Hills society, her husband's business reputation. All of it could crumble if word got out that she'd hit an employee. You're threatening me. I'm explaining consequences. Actions have them, Mrs. Westbrook. Even for people who think their money makes them untouchable. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire ready to snap. Catherine's mind raced through possible damage control scenarios, while Renee struggled with a decision that could change everything. She needed this job desperately, but accepting this treatment would mean accepting something that violated every principle her mother had taught her about dignity and self-worth. "What do you want?" Catherine finally asked. "I want an apology." "Fine. I'm sorry. A real apology. Look me in the eyes and apologize for hitting me." Catherine's jaw worked like she was chewing broken glass. Looking directly at Renee required acknowledging her as an equal human being, something Catherine had worked hard to avoid since the day they met. "I'm sorry I lost my temper." "Try again." "I'm sorry I hit you." The words came out strangled, forced. And it won't happen again." Renee studied Catherine's face, searching for genuine remorse but finding only the sullen resentment of someone forced to apologize. "No, it won't. Because if you ever lay a hand on me again, I will press charges. I will call every newspaper in Los Angeles. I will make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you really are." Catherine's face cycled through several emotions: fury, fear, calculation. "Are we done here?" "For now." But they both knew they weren't done. The foundation of their relationship had cracked so completely that nothing would ever be the same. The careful distance Catherine had maintained, the professional boundaries she'd insisted on, had been shattered by her own hand. Renee picked up her cleaning supplies with deliberate calm. "I'll finish the living room and then start on the kitchen." "Fine." As Renee walked away, Catherine called after her. "This conversation stays between us." Renee paused without turning around. "That depends entirely on you, Mrs. Westbrook." Catherine stood alone in the foyer, staring at her reflection in the mirror that had witnessed everything. The woman looking back at her was someone she didn't recognize, hair disheveled, makeup smudged, eyes wild with something that looked dangerously close to panic. She'd worked so hard to build the perfect life, the perfect image. Rich husband, beautiful home, adorable child, carefully curated social media presence that made thousands of women envy her existence. But in one moment of lost control, she'd revealed the rot beneath the surface. The worst part wasn't the legal threat or even the potential social embarrassment. The worst part was the look in Renee's eyes after the slap. Not surprise, not even anger, but a sad recognition, as if she'd been expecting this all along. Catherine's phone buzzed with a text from her husband. "How's your day going, beautiful?" She stared at the message for a long moment, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. How could she explain that her day had included striking an employee? How could she explain the rage that had consumed her when she saw Renee comforting Caleb? How could she explain the fear that someone else might be better at loving her child than she was? "Fine," she typed back. Just the usual household management. But even as she sent the message, she knew that nothing was usual anymore. The careful balance she'd maintained, the controlled environment she'd created, had been disrupted by forces she couldn't contain. Upstairs, Caleb's singing had stopped. She could hear his small footsteps moving around his playroom, and she realized she should go to him. She should be the mother he needed, the parent who could provide comfort and security. But instead, she stood frozen in the foyer, staring at the spot where she'd struck another human being for the crime of showing kindness to her child. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Renee moved through her cleaning routine with mechanical precision. Her hands shook slightly as she wiped down the granite countertops, and she found herself checking her reflection in the chrome surface of the refrigerator, seeing if the mark of Catherine's hand was visible. Her phone sat on the counter, and she thought about calling her cousin Marcus, about calling the police, about walking out of this house forever. But her bank account had $17, and her rent was due in 2 weeks. The sound of little feet on the stairs made her look up. Caleb appeared in the kitchen doorway, still clutching his elephant, his gray eyes wide and curious. "Nene okay?" he asked. The question nearly broke her heart. Even at 2 years old, he'd sensed that something was wrong. Children were like emotional barometers, picking up on tension and conflict even when adults tried to hide it. "I'm okay, sweetheart," she said softly, glancing toward the foyer to make sure Catherine wasn't watching. "Mama yell." Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements. It's not your fault. He nodded solemnly, processing this information with the seriousness that children bring to things they don't understand but know are important. Ellie's still sick, he said, holding up his elephant. Renee glanced around, making sure they were alone. What if we give Ellie some more medicine? Caleb's face lit up as she knelt down and gently kissed the elephant's head again. But this time, instead of the natural warmth of their earlier interaction, the gesture felt weighted with rebellion, with defiance against rules that prioritized control over compassion. Neither woman could have predicted that their fractured relationship was about to be tested in ways that would force them to confront everything they thought they knew about each other, about themselves, and about what really matters when a child's life hangs in the balance. The stage was set for a reckoning that would change all their lives forever. The hours following the slap stretched like taffy, each minute thick with unspoken tension. Catherine had retreated to her home office, ostensibly to handle correspondence, but really to avoid facing what she'd done. Renee continued her work with robotic precision, every movement calculated to avoid giving Catherine any excuse for further confrontation. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. Preston's voice echoed through the house as he entered through the front door at 2:15 p.m., 4 hours earlier than his usual arrival time. Catherine, I'm home early. The Henderson meeting got moved to tomorrow. Catherine's blood ran cold. She hadn't expected him back until evening, hadn't had time to compose herself or figure out how to explain the tension that now filled their home like smoke from a hidden fire. In here, she called from the office, her voice carefully modulated to sound normal. Preston appeared in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space as he loosened his silver tie. At 35, he still carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd never encountered a problem that couldn't be solved with money or determination. His dark hair was slightly mussed from the December wind, and his gray eyes held the particular satisfaction of a man who just closed a major business deal. "Good day," he asked, crossing to where Catherine sat behind her mahogany desk. "The usual," she replied, not quite meeting his eyes. "Where's Caleb?" "Napping. He should be up soon." Preston nodded and glanced around the office. "Everything okay? You seem tense." Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs. "Just tired. You know how it is with the holidays coming up. So many social obligations to coordinate." It was a safe excuse, one that Preston would accept without question. Catherine's role as the perfect corporate wife involved managing their social calendar with military precision, attending charity galas and dinner parties that served Preston's business interests. "Speaking of which," Preston continued, settling into the leather chair across from her desk, "I need to ask a favor. The Yamamoto delegation is arriving from Tokyo tomorrow for the merger talks. Their flight gets delayed, and they won't make it to the hotel until late. I was hoping we could have them over for dinner Thursday night." Catherine's carefully controlled expression nearly cracked. "Thursday? That's very short notice." "I know, but this deal is worth $200 million. We need to make the right impression." "Of course, but..." Catherine's mind raced. A formal dinner for Japanese executives required perfection. Every detail had to be flawless, from the menu to the table settings to the absolute assurance that nothing would go wrong. And now she had an employee who'd threatened to expose her to the police, to the newspapers, to anyone who would listen. "But what?" "Nothing. I'll make it work." Preston studied her face with the analytical skills that had made him a billionaire by 35. "Cat, what's really going on? You look like you've seen a ghost." The nickname he'd used since college usually made her smile. Today it felt like sandpaper on an open wound. "I'm fine. Really. Just processing the logistics of entertaining on such short notice. We can always take them to the club if..." "No." Catherine's response came too quickly, too sharp. "No, I mean we should host them here. It's more personal, more impressive." What she didn't say was that she couldn't risk being seen in public right now, not with the red mark on her palm that felt like a brand of shame, not with the possibility that her behavior might be exposed to their social circle. A crash from the kitchen interrupted their conversation, followed by the unmistakable sound of glass shattering. "What the hell?" Preston stood immediately, his protective instincts activated. Catherine's stomach dropped to her shoes. I'll handle it. But Preston was already striding toward the kitchen, his long legs covering the distance quickly. Catherine hurried after him, her mind spinning through worst-case scenarios. They found Renee in the kitchen, kneeling on the marble floor surrounded by the scattered remains of what had been a crystal water pitcher. Her face was flushed with embarrassment, and her hands shook slightly as she tried to gather the larger pieces. "I'm so sorry," Renee said without looking up. "I was reaching for the dish soap, and my elbow caught the edge. I'll replace it, I promise." Catherine's breath caught in her throat. The pitcher had been a wedding gift from Preston's mother, handcrafted in Ireland and worth more than Renee's monthly salary. But more than the financial loss, this accident created exactly the kind of situation Catherine had been dreading. Preston and Renee in the same space, with Renee in a vulnerable position that might prompt questions about her treatment. "Are you hurt?" Preston asked, stepping carefully around the glass. "No, sir. Just clumsy." Preston knelt down beside her, ignoring Catherine's sharp intake of breath. "Let me help with that. Some of these pieces are pretty sharp." "Oh no, Mr. Westbrook, you don't need to. It's fine. Accidents happen." Catherine watched in growing panic as her husband and employee worked side by side to clean up the glass. Preston's easy kindness, his complete lack of condescension, stood in stark contrast to her own behavior. The difference was so glaring that she felt exposed, as if her cruelty was written across her forehead in letters Preston couldn't help but see. "Have we met?" Preston asked Renee as they worked. "You look familiar." "I'm Renee Johnson. I've been working here for about 3 weeks now." "Right, the new housekeeper. Catherine mentioned you. How are you settling in?" Renee's eyes flicked briefly to Catherine before returning to Preston. "It's been an adjustment." Something in her tone made Preston pause. "Adjustment how?" Catherine felt the walls closing in around her. "Preston, why don't you let me handle this? I'm sure you have calls to return. Actually, I cleared my afternoon specifically to spend time with you and Caleb." Preston continued gathering glass, seemingly oblivious to the tension radiating from his wife. "Renee, right? Catherine says you have experience with children." "Some, yes, sir. How has Caleb been? Any trouble with the transition to having someone new around?" It was an innocent question, the kind any parent might ask about their child's adjustment to change. But Catherine knew that Renee's answer could destroy everything. "He's a wonderful little boy," Renee said carefully. "Very loving, very curious about the world. That's our Caleb. Sometimes too curious for his own good." Preston chuckled, dumping a handful of glass into the trash. "Catherine worries about him being too trusting with strangers." The irony of the statement hit Catherine like a physical blow. Her son was trusting, but she'd made it clear that trust was something to be discouraged, controlled, managed rather than nurtured. "Children should be able to trust the adults in their lives," Renee said quietly. "Absolutely. Though I suppose it's a balance, right? Teaching them to be open but also safe." Catherine could see where this conversation was heading, could see Preston's natural tendency to engage with people as equals creating exactly the kind of connection she'd tried to prevent. If Renee decided to mention the slap, if she chose this moment to expose Catherine's behavior. "Preston," Catherine interjected, "I think we should let Renee finish cleaning. Caleb will be awake soon, and you wanted to spend time with him." "You're right." Preston stood, brushing off his pants. "Renee, I'm sorry about the pitcher. Don't worry about replacing it. These things happen." "Thank you, sir. That's very kind. And thank you for taking such good care of our home. Catherine tells me you've been doing excellent work." Catherine's face burned. She'd said no such thing, had in fact complained about Renee's overstepping just that morning. But she couldn't contradict Preston without raising questions she wasn't prepared to answer. "I do my best," Renee replied. As Preston left the kitchen, Catherine lingered behind, ostensibly to ensure the cleanup was complete, but really to gauge whether Renee would use this opportunity to expose her. "Your husband seems like a good man," Renee said without looking up from the floor. The comment was neutral, but Catherine heard the implication. Preston was good, kind, reasonable. Catherine was none of those things. "He is. Which is why it would be Unfortunate. If anything disrupted his peace of mind. Renee's hand stilled on the dustpan. Are you threatening me again, Mrs. Westbrook? I'm reminding you that some information serves no purpose except to cause pain. And I'm reminding you that I'm not the one who caused pain today. The standoff continued in whispered tones, two women locked in a battle of wills that neither could afford to lose. Catherine needed Renee's silence to maintain her carefully constructed life. Renee needed Catherine's restraint to keep her job and her dignity. The dinner Thursday night, Catherine said finally. I'll need you to work late. Extended hours for special occasions are part of your job description. Of course. The menu will be challenging. Japanese cuisine requires precision. I trust you can handle additional responsibilities without complications. Renee understood. Catherine was testing her, seeing if she could be trusted to maintain professionalism even under pressure. I can handle whatever you need, Mrs. Westbrook. Good. Because this dinner is crucial for my husband's business. Any disruption, any hint of instability in our household, could cost him millions of dollars. It was brilliant manipulation, really. Catherine was making it clear that any exposure of her behavior wouldn't just hurt her, but would damage Preston's career and, by extension, harm an innocent man who'd shown Renee nothing but kindness. I understand. Do you? Because I need to know that you can work in this house, around my family, without creating drama or drawing attention to personal grievances. I can do my job, Mrs. Westbrook. Even when that job requires working closely with me. Even when we might be in the same room for hours at a time. It was the heart of their problem. The slap had created a chasm between them, but the practical realities of employment meant they had to find a way to coexist. Catherine couldn't fire Renee without risking exposure, and Renee couldn't quit without financial ruin. I'm a professional, Renee said simply. From upstairs came the sound of Caleb stirring from his nap, his small voice calling for his parents. The sound seemed to break some of the tension, reminding both women that there was more at stake here than their personal conflict. I should go to him, Catherine said. Yes, you should. But neither woman moved immediately. They stood in the kitchen surrounded by the remnants of broken crystal, each understanding that they were trapped together by circumstances neither had chosen. The forced proximity would test them both in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The delicate balance they'd achieved could shatter at any moment, and when it did, the consequences would reach far beyond their personal animosity. Forces were already in motion that would test everything they thought they knew about each other, about themselves, and about what really mattered when everything they cared about hung in the balance. The following evening brought an unexpected storm to Los Angeles, the kind of December downpour that caught everyone off guard in a city where rain was more rumor than reality. Lightning illuminated the Westbrook estate in stark flashes, and thunder rolled across the hills like distant artillery fire. Renee had stayed late to prepare for the next evening's crucial dinner with the Japanese executives. Catherine's menu requirements had been exhaustive and deliberately challenging. Traditional kaiseki service with American influences, 7 courses that required precise timing and flawless presentation. It was the kind of meal that would normally require a full catering staff, but Catherine had insisted that Renee handle everything personally. The kitchen had become a battlefield of preparation. Ingredients for miso-glazed black cod lay precisely arranged next to components for a deconstructed beef tataki. Renee moved through the space with the methodical focus of someone who understood that perfection wasn't optional, it was survival. She'd been working since dawn, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she prepared stocks, marinated proteins, and crafted the delicate garnishes that would transform simple ingredients into art. Her back ached from hours of standing, and her eyes burned from the concentration required to create Catherine's vision of entertaining perfection. The house felt different at night, especially with the storm raging outside. The marble floors that seemed so imposing during the day now felt cavernous and cold. The crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows on the walls as lightning flickered through the windows, creating an atmosphere that was both beautiful and slightly ominous. Catherine had retreated to her bedroom hours ago, claiming a headache but really unable to face another day of the careful politeness that now characterized her interactions with Renee. Preston was locked in his study taking calls with international clients, his voice a distant murmur through the heavy oak doors. Only Caleb remained in Renee's orbit, having been allowed to stay up past his usual bedtime because the storm had made him restless and clingy. He sat at the kitchen island on a booster seat, carefully coloring in a dinosaur coloring book while Renee worked. His presence was a violation of Catherine's rules, but the weather and his obvious distress had created an exception that even Catherine couldn't ignore. "Nay, nay," Caleb said, holding up his crayon drawing. "Look, purple dinosaur." "That's beautiful, sweetheart," Renee replied, glancing over as she whisked a delicate sauce. "Purple is a very good color for dinosaurs." "Mama says dinosaurs, not purple." "Well, Mama's right that real dinosaurs probably weren't purple. But in coloring books, dinosaurs can be any color you want them to be." Caleb considered this with the seriousness that children bring to discussions of cosmic importance. "Rainbow dinosaur?" "Absolutely. Rainbow dinosaurs are the best kind." A particularly loud crack of thunder made both of them jump. Caleb's eyes widened with fear, and he looked toward the windows where rain lashed against the glass like angry fingers. "Scary," he whispered. Renee set down her whisk and moved to his side, her maternal instincts overriding any concern about Catherine's rules. "It's just noise, baby. The thunder can't hurt you in here." "Why thunder angry?" The question tugged at Renee's heart. Children always tried to assign emotions and motivations to things they didn't understand, seeking explanations that made sense in their small worlds. "Thunder isn't angry," she said gently. "It's just the sky making music. Like when you bang on your toy drums, remember? The clouds are having a loud conversation." Caleb giggled at this explanation, his fear melting into curiosity. "What clouds talking about?" "Maybe they're arguing about who gets to water the flowers tomorrow. Or maybe they're telling jokes that are so funny they can't help but laugh really, really loud." As she spoke, Renee's hands moved automatically to comfort him, stroking his auburn curls in a gesture so natural it bypassed conscious thought. The action transported her back 25 years to another stormy night, another frightened child who needed reassurance that the world wasn't falling apart. "My mama used to tell me that thunder was just God rearranging the furniture in heaven," Renee said softly, the memory rising unbidden from the depths of her heart. "God has furniture?" "That's what Mama said. She told me that every time I heard thunder, it meant God was making room for something new and beautiful." The words hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than either of them understood. Renee hadn't spoken about her mother to anyone in months, hadn't allowed herself to access those memories because they came paired with too much pain. But something about Caleb's innocent question, about the storm raging outside, about the strange intimacy of this moment in the kitchen, had unlocked a door she'd kept carefully sealed. "Your mama in heaven?" Caleb asked with the matter-of-fact curiosity that children use to discuss the mysteries of life and death. "Yes, baby. She is. My grandmama in heaven too. Daddy's mama." Renee's hands stilled in his hair. She'd known that Preston's mother had died, had seen the formal portrait that hung in the dining room, but she hadn't realized how recent the loss might be. "When did your grandmama go to heaven?" "Before I borned. But Daddy has pictures." The simple statement carried such innocence, such acceptance of loss he'd never even experienced, that Renee felt tears prick at her eyes. Children had a way of discussing death that was both heartbreaking and healing, acknowledging loss without being consumed by it. "I bet your daddy misses her. He cries sometimes. In his office. When he thinks nobody looking." The revelation hit Renee like a physical blow. Preston, with his confidence and success and seemingly perfect life, carried grief that he hid from his family. The image of him alone in his study, mourning a mother his son would never know, humanized him in a way that made Renee's chest ache. "It's okay to cry when we miss people we love," she said softly. "You cry for your mama?" The question was so direct, so innocently perceptive, that Renee couldn't dodge it. "Sometimes, yes. What's she like?" And suddenly, as if a dam had burst inside her chest, the words began to flow. She was the strongest person I ever knew. She worked 2 jobs to send me to school, and she never complained, not once. She had hands like mine." Renee held up her own hands, studying the long fingers and strong palms. "Hands that could fix anything, heal anything." "She doctor like you?" Renee's breath caught. She'd never told anyone in this house about her nursing background, about the degree that hung on her apartment wall, about the career she'd abandoned to care for her dying mother. "How did you know I was a doctor, sweetheart? You fix Ellie. You know medicine words. And you touch like doctor." The observation was so astute, so completely accurate, that Renee stared at him in amazement. Children saw everything, understood more than adults gave them credit for. Caleb had been watching her, cataloging her responses, noting the way she moved with medical precision even while performing household tasks. "I'm not exactly a doctor, but you're very smart to notice. I did study medicine. I learned how to help people who are hurt or sick. Why you clean houses?" The question cut to the heart of everything. Why was someone with her education and training working for starvation wages in a house where she was treated like she was invisible? Why had she given up a career that could have provided financial security and professional respect? "Sometimes life changes our plans," she said carefully. "Sometimes we have to make choices between what we want and what the people we love need. You choose your mama." It wasn't a question. Somehow, this 2-year-old had understood the fundamental sacrifice that had shaped Renee's last 2 years. She'd chosen her mother's final months over her own career advancement, chosen love over ambition, chosen to be present for dying over pursuing her dreams. "Yes, I chose my mama." "Good choice," Caleb said with the absolute certainty that only children possess. "Mama's important." Thunder crashed overhead again, but this time neither of them flinched. They sat together in the warm circle of kitchen light, surrounded by the preparation for tomorrow's performance, sharing truths that neither had expected to voice. "Nay. Yes, baby. If my mama gets sick, you help her?" The question stopped Renee's heart, not because it was difficult to answer, but because of what it revealed about Caleb's understanding of the world. He'd already intuited that his mother was fragile in ways that went beyond physical health, that she might need the kind of help that came from hands that knew how to heal. "If your mama ever needs help, and she wants me to help her, then yes. I would help her. Promise. I promise." The oath hung in the air between them, witnessed by the storm and sanctified by the absolute trust that children placed in adults who'd proven themselves worthy. Renee had no way of knowing that she'd just committed herself to something that would test every skill her mother had taught her, every lesson she'd learned in nursing school, every ounce of courage she possessed. The sound of footsteps on the marble stairs interrupted their conversation. Catherine appeared in the kitchen doorway, her silk robe belted tightly around her waist and her blonde hair falling in waves around her shoulders. She'd obviously been trying to sleep, but the storm and perhaps her own restless conscience had driven her downstairs. "Caleb, what are you still doing up?" "Thunder too loud, Mama. Nene telling me stories." Catherine's eyes moved from her son to Renee, taking in the scene of domestic intimacy that she'd specifically forbidden. But something in the moment, perhaps the vulnerability of the storm or the late hour, kept her from exploding into rage. "Stories about what?" "About God moving furniture and mamas in heaven." Catherine's face went pale. Her own relationship with loss and grief was complicated, layered with guilt and unresolved emotions that she'd never learned to process in healthy ways. The mention of mothers in heaven hit closer to home than anyone knew. "I see," she said quietly. "Nene Mama was strong like doctor," Caleb continued with the innocent enthusiasm of a child sharing exciting news. "She has healing hands." Catherine's eyes snapped to Renee's face, questions forming that she wasn't sure she wanted answered. "Healing hands." "Caleb has a very active imagination," Renee said carefully. "Does he? Or does he see things that adults miss?" The question carried undertones that made Renee's skin prickle with awareness. Catherine was probing, sensing that there were layers to this conversation she hadn't understood. Another crash of thunder shook the house, and the lights flickered ominously. In that moment of uncertainty, with the storm raging outside and secrets swirling in the air between them, none of them could have predicted that within 24 hours, those healing hands Caleb had recognized would be the difference between life and death for the little boy who saw so much more than anyone realized. The storm outside was nothing compared to the emotional tempest building inside the Westbrook home, where past and present were about to collide in ways that would change all their lives forever. The day of the crucial dinner arrived with crystalline December sunshine, as if the previous night's storm had washed the world clean. The Westbrook estate buzzed with controlled energy as final preparations for the evening's entertainment reached fever pitch. The Japanese executives would arrive at 7 sharp, and every detail had to be perfect. Renee had been working since 5 in the morning, her movements through the kitchen choreographed with ballet-like precision. The past 36 hours had created an unexpected shift in the household dynamic. Catherine's discovery of Renee's medical background hadn't led to confrontation, but rather to a careful circling, like two wild animals trying to determine if the other posed a threat. The kitchen had been transformed into a temple of culinary art. 7 courses lay in various stages of preparation. Delicate appetizers of sea urchin and quail egg, perfectly portioned sashimi that looked like edible jewels, and the centerpiece black cod that would be glazed tableside for dramatic effect. Each dish represented hours of meticulous work, but more than that, it represented Renee's determination to prove that excellence wasn't determined by the color of your skin or the size of your paycheck. Catherine stood at the kitchen island, ostensibly supervising but really marveling at the transformation of her space. She wore a navy blue silk dress that hugged her curves perfectly, her blonde hair styled in an elegant chignon that took her hairdresser 2 hours to perfect. Her makeup was flawless, her jewelry understated but expensive. She looked like the picture of corporate wife perfection, but her eyes held something new: uncertainty. "The presentation is impressive," Catherine said, watching Renee arrange microgreens with tweezers-like precision. "Thank you," Renee replied without looking up from her work. The politeness between them had become almost painful in its formality. Gone was the open hostility of 2 days ago, replaced by something more complex and harder to navigate. They were like two people speaking a language they just learned, every word carefully chosen to avoid triggering the landmines of their shared history. Preston emerged from his study wearing a charcoal gray suit that cost more than most people's cars. His silver tie was perfectly knotted, his dark hair styled to casual perfection, and his confidence was palpable. This dinner could secure the merger that would make his company a global powerhouse, and he moved with the focused energy of a man who'd prepared for this moment his entire career. "Status report?" he asked, kissing Catherine's cheek while surveying the kitchen. "Everything's on schedule," Catherine replied, though she was really looking at Renee for confirmation. "The first course will be ready precisely at 7:30, Renee said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd orchestrated complex operations under pressure. The timing should allow for cocktails and introductions without any delays. Preston nodded approvingly. "Excellent. And Caleb?" "He's having dinner in his room tonight," Catherine said. "I thought it best to keep things simple." What she didn't say was that she'd spent the morning anxiously planning every aspect of the evening to minimize variables, to control every element that might go wrong. The slap 2 days ago had shaken her confidence in ways she was still discovering, and the revelation of Renee's hidden qualifications had added another layer of uncertainty to an already precarious situation. "Smart thinking," Preston agreed. "Though I'm sure he would have charmed our guests. Mr. Yamamoto mentioned he has grandchildren Caleb's age." A timer chimed softly, and Renee moved to check the oven where delicate pastry shells were reaching golden perfection. Her movements were fluid, economical, each action serving multiple purposes as she managed 7 different cooking processes simultaneously. Catherine found herself watching with growing fascination. She'd hired Renee as cheap labor, someone desperate enough to accept substandard wages and treatment. But the woman working in her kitchen moved with the confidence of a trained professional, someone accustomed to high-pressure situations where precision mattered. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" Catherine asked, the question escaping before she could stop herself. Renee paused, a pastry shell balanced on her spatula. "My mother taught me the basics. The rest I picked up working in restaurants during nursing school." There it was again, nursing school. The revelation that Catherine was still struggling to process. She'd built her entire relationship with Renee on the assumption that she was dealing with someone with limited options and education. Learning that Renee was actually overqualified for this position by several degrees had shaken Catherine's worldview in ways she wasn't ready to examine. "You worked in restaurants and went to nursing school?" "Night classes, weekend shifts. It took me 6 years to get my degree, but I got it." The simple statement carried enormous weight. Catherine had gone to college on her parents' money, Spent 4 years studying art history while living in a sorority house and worrying about which spring break destination to choose. The idea of working multiple jobs while pursuing an education was so foreign to her experience that she struggled to comprehend the determination it would require. That must have been difficult. It was worth it. Medicine was always my calling. Was. Renee's hand stilled on the counter. Is. Medicine is my calling. The correction was small but significant. Renee hadn't given up on her dreams. She'd simply deferred them to handle more immediate needs. The distinction mattered, though Catherine wasn't sure why. Preston's phone buzzed with an update from his driver. The Yamamoto party just left LAX. They'll be here in 45 minutes. The announcement sent a jolt of nervous energy through the kitchen. Catherine's shoulders tensed visibly, and she began mentally reviewing the evening's timeline for the 100th time. I should go check the dining room again, she said, though she'd already verified every place setting 3 times. Catherine. Preston's voice carried gentle authority. Everything looks perfect. Try to relax. But relaxation was impossible when so much was at stake. This dinner represented more than a business deal. It was a performance of perfection that would be judged by men who expected nothing less than flawless execution. As Catherine left to make her final inspection, Preston lingered in the kitchen. He poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, watching Renee work with obvious appreciation. I have to say, I'm impressed, he said. Catherine was worried about pulling this together on such short notice, but you've made it look effortless. Nothing worthwhile is ever effortless, Renee replied, tasting a sauce and adjusting the seasoning with a chef's intuitive precision. It just requires proper preparation and attention to detail. Spoken like someone who understands pressure. What kind of nursing did you do? The question was casual, conversational, but it opened a door that Renee rarely allowed anyone to walk through. Pediatric ICU, she said quietly. Children with critical illnesses and injuries. Preston's expression sobered immediately. That must have been incredibly challenging. Children are fighters. They have this incredible will to live that puts adults to shame. Even when they're scared, even when they're in pain, they keep hoping for tomorrow. Something in her voice, a note of deep affection mixed with loss, made Preston study her face more carefully. You miss it. Every day. Why did you leave? Renee's hands paused in their constant motion. The question touched on territory that she rarely discussed, memories that were still too fresh and painful to examine closely. My mother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The doctors said she had maybe 6 months if she was lucky. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of impossible choices and sacrificial love. I'm sorry. That must have been devastating. It was. But it was also a gift, in a way. I got to spend her last 8 months with her. I got to take care of her the way she'd taken care of me my whole life. Preston nodded slowly, understanding more than Renee realized. His own mother's death had come suddenly, a heart attack that gave him no chance to say goodbye, no opportunity to express the gratitude and love that children always assume they'll have time for later. 8 months. The doctors were wrong about 6. Mama was stubborn. She held on until she was sure I'd be okay without her. Renee's smile was soft, touched with sadness but also with profound love. She made me promise I'd go back to nursing when I was ready. Made me swear I wouldn't give up on helping children. And will you? Go back. When I can. When I've settled her debts and gotten back on my feet financially. Nursing school loans, medical bills, funeral costs. It adds up quickly. The practical realities of grief were something that people with money rarely had to consider. Preston had never worried about the cost of saying goodbye to someone he loved, had never been forced to choose between mourning and survival. If you don't mind me asking, why domestic work? With your background, surely there were other options. Renee considered how much truth to share. Hospitals require references from recent employers. I'd been out of nursing for almost a year taking care of Mama. Most healthcare facilities want someone who's currently practicing, not someone who's been away from the field. That seems short-sighted. Maybe. But I understand their position. Medicine changes quickly. Skills need to be current. What she didn't say was that her departure from the pediatric ICU had been more complicated than a simple leave of absence. Watching children fight for their lives while her own mother was dying had created an emotional conflict that made her effectiveness questionable. She'd made the difficult decision to step away before her personal grief could compromise her professional judgment. The sound of Caleb's laughter drifted down from upstairs, where he was presumably having dinner and unaware that his house was about to be filled with important strangers. The sound made both adults smile, a reminder of joy in the midst of serious conversations. "He likes you," Preston observed. "Caleb doesn't warm up to everyone quickly." Children are good judges of character. They see through pretense to what's real underneath. "And what do you think he sees in you?" Renee considered the question seriously. Someone who remembers what it's like to be small and need comfort. Someone who believes that kindness isn't weakness. The answer revealed more about Renee's perspective on her current situation than she probably intended. Preston caught the subtle implication. Kindness wasn't weakness, but it was apparently something that was discouraged in his household. "I hope he continues to see that," Preston said quietly. Before Renee could respond, Catherine's voice echoed from the dining room. "Preston!" The car just pulled into the driveway. The moment of connection shattered as reality crashed back. Preston straightened his tie and moved toward the front of the house, transforming from thoughtful conversationalist back into corporate executive mode. Renee took a deep breath and surveyed her carefully orchestrated kitchen. Everything was ready, timed to perfection, waiting for her signal to begin the performance that would determine not just the success of Preston's business deal, but also her own future in this house. Have you ever discovered that someone you misjudged was hiding depths you never imagined? As the doorbell chimed and voices filled the foyer, Renee whispered a small prayer to her mother's memory, asking for strength, for wisdom, and for the grace to navigate whatever the evening might bring. She had no way of knowing that within hours, all the professional skills she'd thought she'd left behind would be called upon to save the life that mattered most to everyone in this house. The stage was set, the players in position, and the performance of a lifetime was about to begin. The dinner had been proceeding with clockwork precision for over an hour. The Japanese executives, led by the distinguished Mr. Yamamoto, had been charmed by Catherine's gracious hospitality and impressed by the flawless execution of each course. Preston's confidence grew with each successful interaction, each nod of approval from his potential business partners. In the kitchen, Renee orchestrated the evening like a conductor leading a symphony. Each dish emerged at precisely the right moment, each flavor profile perfectly balanced, each presentation worthy of a five-star restaurant. She moved through the space with quiet efficiency, appearing in the dining room only long enough to serve each course before retreating to prepare the next. Catherine had surprised herself by how smoothly the evening was flowing. Her anxiety had gradually given way to pride as she watched their guests' obvious appreciation for the meal and the elegant atmosphere she'd created. For the first time in days, she felt in control again, the master of her domain rather than someone walking through a minefield of her own making. The conversation at the dinner table ranged from business strategy to cultural observations, with Preston demonstrating the diplomatic skills that had made him successful in international markets. Mr. Yamamoto, a silver-haired man in his 60s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, had been particularly complimentary about the fusion of traditional Japanese techniques with American creativity. "Mrs. Westbrook," Mr. Yamamoto said as Renee served the sixth course, delicate portions of Wagyu beef with seasonal vegetables. "This meal has been extraordinary. Your chef is truly gifted." Catherine's smile was radiant. "Thank you so much. I'm so pleased you're enjoying it." What she didn't correct was his assumption about who had prepared the meal. Let him think she'd hired an expensive chef rather than admit that their domestic worker had created this culinary masterpiece for below minimum wage. From upstairs came a faint sound that made Catherine's head turn slightly. Caleb's voice, calling for someone. But children called out at bedtime for any number of reasons. Water, another story, fears about monsters under the bed. She made a mental note to check on him when their guests left, but didn't want to excuse herself during such a crucial moment in the evening. Preston was deep in discussion about market expansion strategies when the sound came again, louder this time and more distressed. "Mama! Mama!" Catherine's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Caleb's voice carried a note of panic that cut through her dinner party composure like a knife. "If you'll excuse me for just a moment," she said to her guests, her smile never wavering even as concern flickered in her eyes. "I should check on my son." She rose gracefully from her chair, every movement calculated to suggest that this was a minor interruption rather than genuine worry. But as she reached the foot of the stairs, Caleb's cries became more urgent, more frightening. "Mama! Can't! Catherine's careful composure cracked as she heard the desperation in his voice. She climbed the stairs quickly, her heels clicking against the marble steps in rapid staccato. Behind her, she could hear Preston smoothly engaging their guests in conversation about the architectural details of the house, covering for her absence with professional skill. She found Caleb's bedroom door open, light spilling into the hallway. When she stepped inside, her heart nearly stopped. Caleb was sitting on his small bed, his face red and contorted with distress. His hands were at his throat, and he was making horrible choking sounds that no parent ever wants to hear. His gray eyes were wide with terror as he struggled to breathe, small gasps escaping his lips between attempts to cough. Oh God, Catherine whispered, rushing to his side. "Caleb, baby, what's wrong?" But even as she asked the question, she could see the answer. On his nightstand sat a small bowl that had contained grapes, his favorite bedtime snack. The fruit she'd given him to keep him occupied during the dinner party. One of the grapes had apparently lodged in his throat, blocking his airway. Catherine's mind went completely blank. All her careful control, all her social graces, all her management skills evaporated in the face of her child's crisis. She'd never encountered a medical emergency, had never been trained in first aid, had always assumed that emergencies happened to other people's children. "Can you cough?" "Try to cough it up, baby," she said frantically, her voice rising with panic. But Caleb's attempts to cough were weak and ineffective. The grape was lodged too firmly, and his small face was beginning to take on a bluish tinge that made Catherine's blood run cold. "Preston!" she screamed, her voice carrying through the house like a siren. "Preston, help!" Downstairs, the dinner conversation stopped abruptly. Preston's chair scraped against the floor as he stood, his face pale with concern. "Please excuse me," he said to his guests, his voice tight with barely controlled worry. "I need to check on my family." But even as he spoke, they could all hear Catherine's continued screams from upstairs, the kind of desperate cries that spoke of genuine emergency rather than minor childhood drama. Preston took the stairs 3 at a time, his expensive shoes sliding on the marble in his haste. Behind him, Mr. Yamamoto and his colleagues exchanged concerned glances, uncertain whether they should leave or offer assistance. In the kitchen, Renee heard Catherine's screams and immediately abandoned the dessert course she'd been plating. Every instinct she'd developed during years in pediatric emergency medicine kicked into high gear. The tone of Catherine's voice, the desperation in her cries, spoke of the kind of crisis that required immediate medical intervention. She wiped her hands quickly and moved toward the stairs, but stopped herself. Catherine had been explicit about boundaries, about staying in her assigned role. But the sounds coming from upstairs suggested something that went beyond household rules and social hierarchies. Another scream from Catherine made the decision for her. Renee ran up the stairs, her sneakers silent on the marble, her mind already cataloging possible scenarios and interventions. She found the family clustered around Caleb's bed, Preston and Catherine both in states of barely controlled panic. Caleb's face was now definitely blue around the lips, his struggles to breathe becoming weaker as oxygen deprivation took its toll. "Call 911. Preston was saying, his phone already in his hand. "There's no time," Catherine sobbed. "Look at him. There's no time." And she was right. Renee could see immediately that this was a complete airway obstruction. Caleb had maybe minutes before the lack of oxygen caused permanent brain damage or worse. Even the fastest ambulance response wouldn't be quick enough. "Mrs. Westbrook," Renee said quietly from the doorway. Catherine spun around, her face streaked with tears and contorted with terror. "Not now. Can't you see? I can help him." The simple statement cut through Catherine's panic like a blade. For a moment, the room fell silent except for Caleb's labored breathing. "What?" Catherine whispered. "I said I can help him. But I need you to let me touch him. I need you to trust me." Preston looked between his wife and their employee, understanding immediately what Renee was offering. You know how to handle this. Pediatric airway obstruction. I've dealt with it dozens of times. Catherine's face went white. Everything she'd said about boundaries, about not touching her child, about staying in assigned roles, suddenly seemed not just petty but potentially deadly. Her son was dying, and the woman she'd slapped and humiliated was offering to save him. Catherine's voice broke. Mrs. Westbrook, Renee said urgently, every second matters. His oxygen saturation is dropping. We have maybe 2 minutes before he loses consciousness. Catherine looked at Caleb, at his blue-tinged face and weakening struggles, then back at Renee. The woman she'd treated as less than human was now her child's only hope. Please, Catherine whispered. Please help him. Renee moved to the bed with the controlled urgency of someone trained to handle medical crises. She gently but firmly positioned Caleb, supporting his small body as she prepared to perform the back blows and chest thrusts that could dislodge the grape. Turn around, sweetie, she said softly to Caleb, her voice calm and reassuring despite the urgency of the situation. Renee's going to help you feel better. But as she raised her hand to deliver the first back blow, Catherine suddenly grabbed her wrist. Wait, Catherine said, her voice shaking. What if you hurt him? What if you make it worse? The question hung in the air like poison gas. Here, in the moment of ultimate crisis, Catherine's prejudices and need for control were still fighting against her maternal instinct. Renee looked directly into Catherine's eyes, her voice steady and professional. Mrs. Westbrook, if I don't do this right now, your son will die. It's that simple. You can trust me to save him, or you can watch him suffocate while you decide whether I'm qualified enough to touch him. The brutal honesty of the statement shattered something inside Catherine. All her careful social constructions, all her assumptions about worth and place and proper order, crumbled in the face of her dying child and the steady competence of the woman she'd tried so hard to diminish. The room held its breath as Catherine stared into Renee's eyes, seeing for the first time not a servant or a threat to her authority, but a trained medical professional who held her son's life in her capable hands. Time was running out, and the choice that would define the rest of their lives hung in the balance like a sword waiting to fall. Catherine's grip on Renee's wrist lasted only seconds, but those seconds felt like hours as Caleb's face darkened further and his struggles grew weaker. In that frozen moment, everything hung in the balance. Years of prejudice against maternal love, social conditioning against desperate need, pride against the most basic human instinct to protect a child. Let her help him, Preston said, his voice cutting through Catherine's paralysis like a blade. Catherine, let her help our son. The word "our" broke something loose inside Catherine's chest. This wasn't about her fears or her need to maintain control. This was about Caleb, about the little boy who called her mama and trusted her to keep him safe. Catherine released Renee's wrist and stepped back, her hands trembling as she watched Renee take control of the situation with the calm authority of someone who'd faced pediatric emergencies countless times before. I need you both to stay calm, Renee said, positioning Caleb face down across her forearm, supporting his chest with her hand. He can sense your fear, and it will make him panic more. Her voice carried the kind of steady reassurance that parents in crisis cling to like life rafts. This was Renee in her element, the pediatric nurse who'd spent years saving children's lives, not the domestic worker who'd been forbidden to show affection to a distressed toddler. With practiced precision, Renee delivered 5 sharp back blows between Caleb's shoulder blades, each one calculated to dislodge the grape without causing additional trauma. When that didn't immediately work, she flipped him over and performed chest thrusts, her movements exact and controlled. Come on, sweetheart, she murmured to Caleb, her voice gentle despite the urgency. Help me help you. On the 4th back blow, Caleb suddenly coughed violently, and a small piece of grape shot from his mouth onto the bedroom floor. But his breathing was still labored, suggesting that fragments remained lodged in his airway. Is he okay? Catherine asked frantically. Is that all of it? Not yet, Renee replied, continuing the procedure. Sometimes the fruit breaks apart. We need to make sure his airway is completely clear. 2 more back blows, and Caleb coughed up another piece of grape. His color began to improve immediately as oxygen flowed back into his lungs, the terrifying blue tinge fading from his lips and face. There we go, Renee said softly, turning Caleb upright and holding him against her chest as his breathing steadied. "You're okay, baby. You're okay now." Caleb's cries were now those of a frightened but breathing child rather than someone fighting for life. He clung to Renee with the desperate grip of someone who understood, even at 2 years old, that she'd just saved him from something terrible. Catherine collapsed into the small chair beside Caleb's bed, her legs giving out as the adrenaline that had sustained her through the crisis suddenly drained away. She stared at Renee holding her son, watching the gentle way she stroked his hair and whispered comfort to him, and felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. "My God," Preston breathed, running his hands through his hair. "Renee, you saved his life." "Just doing what needed to be done," Renee replied, but her own voice shook slightly as the reality of what had almost happened hit her. Another 30 seconds of Catherine's hesitation, and they would have lost him. "How did you know what to do?" Catherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Pediatric choking protocol. It was the first thing they taught us in nursing school, and I've used it more times than I like to remember." Renee continued to hold Caleb, who was now breathing normally but still clinging to her like she was his anchor in a storm. Children this age put everything in their mouths. Grapes are actually one of the most common choking hazards for toddlers. The statement wasn't accusatory, but Catherine heard the implication anyway. She'd given Caleb whole grapes, had never thought to cut them into smaller pieces, had never considered that something so innocent could become so deadly. "I didn't know," Catherine said, and for the first time in years, she admitted ignorance without defensiveness. "I should have known, but I didn't." "Most parents don't," Renee said gently. "That's why pediatric safety education is so important." From downstairs came the sound of concerned voices. Preston suddenly remembered their dinner guests, the Japanese executives who were probably wondering if they should call for emergency services or simply leave. "I should." Preston gestured toward the stairs. "Go," Renee said. "Tell them everything's fine now. Caleb just needs some time to calm down." Preston hesitated for a moment, looking at his son safe in Renee's arms, then at his wife who sat stunned in the chair. "Are you sure he's okay?" "His breathing is clear, his color is good. He should be checked by a pediatrician tomorrow to make sure there's no residual swelling or irritation, but the immediate danger has passed." Preston nodded and headed downstairs to salvage what was left of the most important business dinner of his career. But as he descended the marble steps, he knew that the real importance of this evening had nothing to do with mergers or business deals. Alone in Caleb's bedroom, Catherine and Renee faced each other across a chasm that had just been bridged by crisis. Caleb had finally stopped crying, though he remained pressed against Renee's chest, his small fingers twisted in the fabric of her shirt. "I don't understand," Catherine said quietly. "What don't you understand?" "Why you helped him. After everything I've done to you, everything I've said. Why did you save him?" The question revealed the depth of Catherine's self-awareness about her own behavior, and also the depth of her confusion about basic human decency. "Because he's a child," Renee said simply. "Because he needed help, and I had the ability to provide it. It's not complicated. But I hit you. I threatened you. I treated you like I was less than human," Renee finished when Catherine couldn't. "Yes, you did." The acknowledgement hung between them like a confession that couldn't be taken back. "So why?" Catherine's voice broke. "Why would you risk your job, risk making me angry, to help the child of someone who's been so cruel to you?" Renee looked down at Caleb, who had fallen asleep against her chest, exhausted by his ordeal. His auburn curls were damp with perspiration, and his long eyelashes cast shadows on his cheeks in the soft bedroom light. "Because that's what my mother taught me," she said softly. "She used to say that love isn't something you give only to people who deserve it. Love is something you give because you have it to give. Especially to children, who never deserve to suffer for the mistakes of adults." Catherine felt tears start to flow down her cheeks, hot and unexpected. "Your mother sounds like she was an amazing woman." She was. She would have liked Caleb. She always said that children are proof that God believes in second chances. Second chances? Every child born is a fresh start, a chance for the world to be better than it was before. They don't carry the prejudices or fears or hatred of previous generations. They have to be taught those things. The implication was clear, and Catherine felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. What was she teaching her son about how to treat people? What lessons was he learning from watching her interactions with Renee? "I've been a terrible person," Catherine whispered. "You've been a hurt person," Renee corrected gently. "Hurt people often hurt other people. But that doesn't mean you can't change." "How do you know I'm hurt?" Renee shifted Caleb slightly, making sure he was comfortable as he slept. "Because happy people don't need to make other people feel small to feel big themselves. Secure people don't need to control everything around them to feel safe." The observation was delivered without malice, but it cut Catherine to the bone because of its accuracy. She had spent so much energy trying to control her environment, to maintain her position, to prove her worth, that she'd never stopped to examine why she felt so threatened by kindness from an employee. "What am I so afraid of?" Catherine asked, more to herself than to Renee. "Only you can answer that. But maybe you're afraid that if people see who you really are underneath all the performance, they won't think you're worth loving." The words hit Catherine like a physical blow because they were so precisely true. Her entire life had been a carefully constructed performance designed to prove her value. The perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect hostess. But underneath all that performance was a terrified little girl who'd never felt like she was enough just as she was. "What if they're right?" Catherine whispered. "What if I'm not worth loving?" Renee looked at her with something that might have been compassion. "You just watched your child nearly die and fell apart at the thought of losing him. You love him more than your own pride, more than your need to be right. That tells me your heart knows how to love, even if your head has forgotten how to show it." "But I've been so awful to you." "Yes, you have. But you also just trusted me with the most precious thing in your world when it mattered most. That tells me something too." Catherine stared at Renee, this woman she'd tried so hard to diminish and control, and saw clearly for the first time not just her competence and kindness, but her wisdom. Renee understood things about human nature, about love and fear and redemption, that Catherine had never learned despite all her education and privilege. "I don't know how to apologize for what I've done," Catherine said. "Apologies are just words," Renee replied. "What matters is what you do next." From downstairs came the sound of the front door closing as the Japanese executives departed, their business dinner cut short by the crisis. Preston's footsteps could be heard climbing the stairs, returning to check on his family and face whatever consequences the evening's events might bring. Sometimes it takes a crisis to show us who we really are underneath all our carefully constructed walls. The choice that would define their future still lay ahead, waiting in the quiet space between crisis and resolution, between who they had been and who they might become. The morning after the crisis dawned gray and quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath to see what would emerge from the ashes of the previous evening. Caleb had slept peacefully through the night, his breathing steady and strong, but the adults in the Westbrook house had found sleep elusive. Catherine sat in the kitchen where everything had started 3 weeks ago, cradling a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour earlier. She'd been there since dawn, staring at the spot where she'd slapped Renee, replaying the events of the past month like a film she couldn't turn off. The sound of footsteps on the service entrance stairs announced Renee's arrival. She appeared in the kitchen doorway precisely at 7 a.m., as she had every weekday for 3 weeks, but everything felt different now. The careful distance that had characterized their relationship had been shattered by crisis and truth-telling. "Good morning, Mrs. Westbrook," Renee said quietly, unsure of what protocol existed for the morning after you'd saved your employer's child while that employer grappled with the magnitude of her own prejudice. "Renee." Catherine's voice was hoarse from the tears she'd shed through the sleepless night. How is he supposed to be today? Medically, I mean. He should be fine. Children are remarkably resilient. But I'd still recommend having his pediatrician take a look, just to be thorough." Catherine nodded, then gestured to the chair across from her. Would you sit with me for a moment?" It was the first time Catherine had ever invited Renee to sit at the kitchen table, the first acknowledgement that she might be worthy of basic human courtesy. Renee hesitated, then took the offered seat. They sat in silence for a long moment, two women who'd been forced to see each other clearly for the first time. "I've been thinking all night," Catherine said finally. "About what you said, about hurt people hurting other people. About what I'm teaching Caleb. And I realized that my son almost died last night because of my pride. Because I'd rather maintain control than accept help from someone I decided was beneath me." Catherine's voice cracked. "What kind of mother does that make me?" "A human one," Renee said gently. "One who made a mistake in a moment of crisis. The question is what you do with that knowledge now." Catherine reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, placing it on the table between them. "This is your final paycheck, plus a bonus that covers the wages I should have been paying you all along." Renee stared at the envelope, understanding immediately what was happening. "You're firing me." "No," Catherine said quickly. "I'm apologizing. And I'm offering you a choice." "What kind of choice?" Catherine took a shaky breath, as if preparing to jump off a cliff. "I called the children's hospital this morning. I know the head of pediatric nursing there through charity work. I told her about a remarkable nurse who'd been out of practice for family reasons, but who saved my son's life last night with skills that clearly haven't diminished." Renee's eyes widened. "Mrs. Westbrook. She wants to meet with you on Monday. The position is yours if you want it. Full salary, full benefits, and they'll even provide refresher training to get you back up to speed on any new protocols." The offer hung in the air like a gift too precious to believe. Everything Renee had been working toward, everything she'd sacrificed and dreamed about, was suddenly within reach. "Why would you do that for me?" "Because it's the right thing to do. Because you're a healer, and the world needs healers more than it needs people who can arrange flowers and plan dinner parties." Catherine's smile was watery but genuine. "Because my mother-in-law used to say that we're all just walking each other home, and maybe it's time I started helping instead of hindering." Tears gathered in Renee's eyes. "Your mother-in-law sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was. She would have loved you. She always said that character reveals itself in crisis, and that the measure of a person isn't what they do when people are watching, but what they do when it would be easier to walk away." The words carried weight because they came from someone who'd finally learned to see clearly. "There's something else," Catherine continued. "I want to ask you to stay. Stay. Not as a housekeeper. As whatever you want to be. A friend, if you think you could ever forgive me enough for that. Someone who could teach me how to be a better mother, a better person." The request was so unexpected, so vulnerable, that Renee felt her carefully maintained composure crack. "Catherine, I know I don't deserve it. I know I've been terrible to you. But Caleb adores you, and you've shown more wisdom about parenting in 3 weeks than I've managed in 2 years. I need to learn how to love him the way you do. Not possessively, not as a reflection of my own worth, but just, purely." The honesty was raw, unguarded, completely different from the controlled woman who'd hired Renee 3 weeks ago. "And Preston?" Renee asked. "What does he think about all this?" "Preston thinks I should have done this weeks ago. He said he's never seen Caleb as happy as he was when you were taking care of him." Catherine's smile was rueful. "Apparently, I haven't been as subtle about my feelings as I thought." From upstairs came the sound of small feet running across hardwood floors, followed by Caleb's voice calling for his parents. The joyful noise of a healthy, breathing child filled the house with life. "Mama! Daddy! Where's Nene?" Catherine and Renee looked at each other and began to laugh, the kind of laughter that comes after tears, after crisis, after the walls between people finally come down. "I think that's your answer," Catherine said. Preston appeared in the kitchen doorway carrying Caleb, who immediately spotted Renee and reached for her with the uninhibited enthusiasm of childhood. "Nene, you came back." "Of course I came back, sweetheart," Renee said, accepting his eager hug. "I told you I would. Daddy said you helped me breathe last night." "I don't remember." "That's okay. You were very brave, and you're all better now." Preston set Caleb down and looked between his wife and Renee, noting the tear-streaked faces and the envelope on the table. "Everything okay in here?" "Better than okay," Catherine said, standing and moving to her husband's side. I've just offered Renee her dream job. The nursing position? That's wonderful. Preston's genuine pleasure was evident. Though I have to admit, we're going to miss having you here. Actually, Renee said, looking at Caleb, who was now showing her a drawing he'd made that morning, I was hoping we could work something out. Maybe I could take the hospital position but still spend time here? Not as an employee, but as family, Catherine finished softly. As family. The word hung in the air like a blessing, transforming everything it touched. Family wasn't about blood or obligation or carefully maintained boundaries. Family was about people who chose to love each other despite their flaws, who showed up in crisis, who walked each other home. Family, Renee repeated, and for the first time in months, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged. 6 weeks later, on a sunny January morning, Renee walked through the pediatric ward of Children's Hospital Los Angeles wearing scrubs the color of spring sky. Her ID badge identified her as a senior pediatric nurse, and her confidence had returned like muscle memory. That afternoon, she drove to Beverly Hills to have lunch with Catherine and Caleb, as she did every Tuesday and Thursday. They developed a routine. Caleb would show her his latest artwork while Catherine practiced the kind of patient, attentive parenting that Renee had modeled. The transformation hadn't been instant or perfect. Catherine still struggled with her need for control, still caught herself making assumptions based on appearances. But she was learning, with Renee's gentle guidance, to lead with curiosity rather than judgment, with love rather than fear. Preston had been right about the Japanese deal. Despite the dinner party's dramatic conclusion, Mr. Yamamoto had been so impressed by the family's handling of the crisis, by the grace under pressure and the genuine care they'd shown for each other, that he'd called the next day to finalize the merger. Real relationships, he'd told Preston, mattered more than perfect presentations. And Caleb? Caleb thrived in an environment where the adults in his life had learned to love openly, to admit mistakes, to treat all people with dignity regardless of their job titles or skin color. He was learning, through daily example, that kindness was strength, that vulnerability was courage, and that the best families were the ones you chose to build together. On this particular Tuesday, as Renee helped Caleb tend the small garden they'd planted in the backyard, Catherine watched from the kitchen window and marveled at how much had changed. The woman she'd once tried to diminish had become her closest friend, her wisest counselor, and her son's beloved second mother. Nay, Caleb said, holding up a tomato seedling. Will this grow big like you helped me grow big? Everything grows when it's loved properly, Renee replied, glancing toward the window where Catherine stood. Sometimes we just need the right conditions. Good soil, enough water, and plenty of sunshine. Catherine pressed her hand to the glass, understanding that she was witnessing something miraculous. The daily practice of unconditional love, the patient work of nurturing growth, the profound transformation that happens when people choose connection over separation. Love, it turned out, really could conquer all. Not easily, not without struggle and humility and the courage to change. But when we finally let go of our need to be right and embrace our need to be human, amazing things become possible. What moments in your own life have taught you that love is stronger than fear? The sound of Caleb's laughter carried on the January breeze, a reminder that sometimes the most profound changes begin with the simplest choice. To see each other clearly, to love without condition, and to trust that tomorrow can be better than today. In the end, that was all any family needed. The courage to begin again, together. The transformation of the Westbrook household was complete by summer. Catherine had hired Maria Gonzalez, a middle-aged woman from East LA, as their new housekeeper, but this time at full market wages with benefits and genuine respect. Catherine even insisted Maria join them for family meals when she wanted to, a gesture that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. Dr. Patricia Chen, Caleb's pediatrician, had given him a clean bill of health after the choking incident, with no lasting effects whatsoever. She'd also provided Catherine with comprehensive child safety training, something Catherine embraced with the enthusiasm of someone making up for lost time. The Beverly Hills social circuit had been initially confused by Catherine's friendship with the former help, but her genuine happiness and Caleb's obvious flourishing silenced most critics. Those who couldn't accept the change simply faded from their social circle, replaced by more genuine relationships Catherine built through her volunteer work at the Children's Hospital. Renee had quit her other part-time jobs within a month of starting at the hospital. Her mother's medical debts were finally paid off, and she'd even managed to save enough for a small apartment in Pasadena, closer to both her work and her chosen family. Mr. Yamamoto had indeed been impressed by the family's crisis management, telling Preston that any household that could handle emergencies with such grace and genuine care was exactly the kind of business partner he wanted. The merger had made Preston's company the largest tech firm on the West Coast. Preston himself had become one of Renee's biggest advocates, often joking that she'd saved not just his son's life but his wife's soul. He'd started a scholarship fund at UCLA's nursing school in honor of Dorothy Johnson, Renee's mother, ensuring other students wouldn't have to choose between education and caring for family. Caleb, now 2.5, called both Catherine and Renee Mama, Catherine Mama Cat, and Renee Mama Nay. Rather than being jealous, Catherine treasured this arrangement, understanding that love multiplied rather than divided when shared freely. The boy who'd once been forbidden from receiving comfort from loving hands now lived in a home where kindness was the default, where differences were celebrated rather than feared, and where every adult in his life was committed to raising him with both roots and wings. On this particular Saturday, as Catherine watched Renee teach Caleb to plant sunflowers in their garden while Preston grilled vegetables nearby, she reflected on how close they'd all come to missing this joy. One moment of pride, one refusal to let go of prejudice, could have cost them everything that mattered. But grace had intervened in the form of a woman who chose love over resentment, healing over revenge, and hope over despair. The sunflowers, Renee explained to Caleb, would grow tall enough to tower over the garden fence, their faces always turning toward the light. Just like the people who tended them. Sometimes the most beautiful gardens grow from the most broken ground, watered by tears and tended by hands that know both hurt and healing. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, wait until you see what's coming next. It's even more powerful and inspiring than you can imagine. So don't go anywhere. Click on that video showing on your screen right now to dive into another amazing story that will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you won't regret it.